though, again, in P.E.A.C.E's ever-expanding effort to find that which is beyond the normal and which is building bridges between the way things have been and the way they might be. We have today's guest, Miles Lewis. Welcome, Miles.
Thank you.
And Miles is the publisher and editor of Elf-Infested Spaces, and I could say that wrong about 10 different ways. Journal of Possible Paradigms, and also a contributor to Crash Collusion, which is
another local Fringe magazine.
Fringe magazine. So tell us a little about the Fringe that you're on, Miles.
Well, the area of the Fringe I like to find myself in the most is that area regarding UFOs and paranormal weirdness, which might include everything from ghosts and communications with discarnate entities to near-death experiences to shamanic experiences that indigenous peoples might have, and helping people come to grips with these experiences, and so that they don't feel so alienated by the community at large, who typically regards these experiences as being abnormal or out of the everyday normal experience of everyday life.
And part of the whole fascination of a lot of people in our culture is that we don't really have an outlet for a way of dealing with these experiences.
Yeah.
Does your group try to help people? In a sense, you're serving like a role of like initiating people or helping them through these passages in a way.
Well, with the local Austin UFO experiencer support group that meets twice a month here in Austin, we've been trying to do just that. There are other organizations who serve as liaisons between the public and investigators of these phenomena, such as MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network, located in Seguin, Texas, and they have a local chapter here, which is how I basically got connected with all this research. There's a contingent of upwards of 100 people here in Austin who are part of the firm UFO community here, and doing sightings investigations and the transcription of testimony by witnesses and so forth. And with the support group, which has its origins in the local MUFON hierarchy, we've tried to provide a forum for people to talk about these experiences and not feel that they're being considered crazy or hallucinating or what have you. We entertain all possibilities in our dialogues with these people, and I myself have not had the experience of UFO contact or sighting an object. Well, I've seen objects even recently on my trip to Berkeley. On the way back, I saw some shimmering objects over the Sierra Nevadas, but they were most likely some kind of military craft, but interesting nonetheless. So yeah, we try to provide a forum for people to feel that these experiences aren't so out of the ordinary. And hopefully that will reduce the fear that so many people have with encountering the unknown.
So MUFON is an open meeting. People can come to those.
Yeah.
Where do people find out about?
MUFON can be contacted through Monty and Ellen Stewart. I'm not sure if they want me to give their phone number in the air, but they can.
In the Chronicle, do they publish meeting sites?
Occasionally they publish them in the Chronicle. Also, our support group publishes meeting listings in the Chronicle on occasion, and basically the MUFON meetings happen once a month. I really don't have the times or the dates with me right at this moment, but I'm sure that I can give you the information, and your viewers can contact you and give that information to them.
Okay.
And like I said, that's how I met so many of these wonderful people, both experiencers and investigators, and some are both, to talk about these experiences.
Right. Well, one of the interesting things as an artist that I immediately, when you talk about the support group, is there's such a lack in our society of just places where people can come together and just share any kind of experience that they're going through. One of the unique things about the way you approach it, as when I was introduced to you, is the whole idea that there's a whole range of experiences that the question of whether it's real or not, quote unquote, whether you have a scar in your leg, whether you were actually taken somewhere, is important but not essential to the reality, quote unquote, of the experience, which is really as much an inner thing as an outer thing.
Well, my interest, I started with an interest. I mean, I grew up on a healthy dose of science fiction, so the idea of extraterrestrials and spaceships has always fascinated me, and I grew up thinking that that was just inevitable, and that it had probably already happened if it wasn't destined to happen. And I also grew up with kind of a feeling that maybe science didn't have all the answers, and that there was psychic phenomenon and the powers of the mind. From that, you know, I used to think of just, like I said, a nuts and bolts interpretation of UFOs as spacecraft. You know, they're hot rodding around in their flying saucers. But since I've really started looking into this phenomenon, you find that there are all these connections that you never would have imagined with mystical and religious phenomena, and there's people who've made their entire careers out of looking into these different areas. But what's significant, whereas MUFON particularly is interested in investigating sightings and the evidence left for that, because they're trying to prove the existence of these objects, and that maybe is the problem, that they're treating them as objects to be examined. And the science of this is called ufology, UFOlogy, and some people call it ufology. But it's a very interesting thing, because you can't get a UFO into the laboratory. I mean, it would be nice if we could get a UFO right here and examine it and kick the tires. Yeah. But I think they're a little more ephemeral than that. And beyond that, the experience that these people have with those objects and with these entities, if that's indeed what they are, these intelligences, they have such a powerful impact on their interior individual lives, and thus their lives in relationship to the rest of us. Because someone who's had this profound experience, whether it was traumatic, the abduction type experience that you hear about, or maybe a visitation by what they call them the Space Brothers, you know, who have come to enlighten our people and to lead us into the galactic hierarchy of other intelligences, whatever the case may be, though the people who've had these experiences take these experiences to heart, and it influences the way they interact with us, for better or worse. I think typically what I see these people going on in their lives after the experiences, what I see is them having more of an open-mindedness that they didn't have before, and I think that is a positive, but it's really staggering to see. It's like a religious conversion for a lot of people. Not that they suddenly subscribe to a new church, you know, worshiping these saucers or what have you. I mean, there are those that do, but the ones that I find, they're left in this kind of quantum state of flux, where they can identify with one theory one moment, and then with another theory the next. And authors like Whitley Strieber and Philip K. Dick, who are considered to be horror and science fiction writers, have had experiences with this phenomena, and you can really see it in their dealings with it, whether it be in their fiction or their faction. They have this going from one extreme to the other and all points in between, trying to figure out what this could have been. And Philip K. Dick, in the end, he said, you know, I don't think I'll ever know the truth, but maybe that's the point. Maybe we can't know the truth.
Right. Well, one of the things that occurs to me about the whole issue of the reality of a UFO is really the ultimate question is, for each person, is how real would this have to be to affect my life? And for some people, how real a UFO would have to be is it would have to come down and hit them over the head with something. And for other people who just have an open mind, it could be the idea that that human beings, there's the Shakespeare quote, there are stranger things under heaven than we've seen, kind of thing. So really, for those people who are kind of the couch potato person sitting home and saying, prove it to me, it's kind of like they want they want a spaceship to fly out of their set, or somebody to call them up and say, you don't have to go to work tomorrow because we're having
the saucers have landed.
The saucers have landed, or something like that.
Well, that's been the big, the rallying call for so long has been, well, you know, if they're real, why don't they land on the White House lawn? And well, if you look at the sightings in historic context, they do seem to have been here as long as we've been here, which is a very kind of disheartening thought. I mean, there are those that say that they created us, which may just be a new interpretation of God creating us, but their presence has been felt throughout history and via our culture, and that's something that people just don't have the capacities typically to grasp. And so the schlock that you see on television and on the current affair, where it's just over and over this idea of these aliens doing genetic experiments and so forth, that it really it hammers it into one pigeonhole, and that's just not representative of what's really going on. And what's really going on is so bizarre that, as one researcher said, if people really knew what was going on, they'd be throwing their children out the window and screaming bloody murder. But I don't know if it's quite that bad.
Yeah.
But I think it's exciting because when we were talking earlier with Shiva and Tom, I'm the kind of person I can talk about UFOs in the context of everything. Whether that's a benefit or a hazard, I'm not sure.
Right.
But like when you talk about the internet, there are these weird connections between UFO research and the creation of the internet. For instance, Dr. Jacques Vallée, one of the field's most respected UFO researchers, had his hands in the creation of some of the original protocols for the internet, and is, among other things, he helped NASA design some of their computer networks and so forth. And all of that kind of came out of the Stanford Research Institute, SRI, which has done experiments in psychic remote viewing, in free energy with zero-point energy research, and they also are the ones, as Tom informed me, that they're the ones who processed the original photos of some of the Mars stuff, the face on Mars, and all that whole bit. And it is like the internet itself. It is this web of interconnection that you could just spend your whole life, in which I think I'm going to be doing, looking at all the different facets, all the reflections and reflections and reflections. And hopefully it's not Narcissus, and hopefully we're not Narcissus looking at a reflection and getting distracted by it. Hopefully we're seeing some meaning behind it. Right. And the meaning I get behind it is that the UFO event is a transformational event in the person's life. I just presented a paper in Berkeley to the Society for the Anthropology of Consciousness, and their papers ranged from apparition sightings to sex research to Freudian interpretations of defense mechanisms to my paper, which is about UFOs. And mine was Encounters with the Fantastic, the Transformative UFO Paradigm. And what I tried to show was that you can link, that several researchers have pointed out the connections between near-death experiences, shamanic journeys, out-of-body experiences, astral projection, and UFOs, and spiritualist traditions of communicating with the dead. These all have these interconnections that, while they may not give you an answer, they kind of show you the tapestry that this is all happening within. And from there, it seems obvious that their altered states of consciousness seem to be involved in this, and that's where the anthropology of consciousness comes in, where whether it be at nighttime when the person's sleeping and they wake up and a ball of light comes through their room and forms into a figure that starts doing things to them, or whether they're out on the road and they see a lighted object come down and they go to investigate and they find beings disembarking from a craft and taking soil samples, whatever the case may be. Often the witnesses describe a qualitative state of consciousness that was different from what they were in before. And this is not to say that it's hallucination induced by drugs or electrochemical processes, though that does seem to be a factor. The point seems to be that perhaps these intelligences are communicating us while we're in a state of consciousness that it does not normally facilitate linear communication like we're doing now. Right. That it might be a more symbolic form of communication, and that's maybe why we get them in our dreams, or we have dreams that seem so real that we wonder what reality really is and what memory really is. There's the whole debate right now over false memory syndrome in satanic ritual abuse cases and in child abuse cases. The UFO community has typically avoided this subject because they don't want to be written off as all this being fantasy, but it's something that they need to look at because, once again, we don't know what memory is. We have very little idea. So, going through that in the paper, I touched on all these areas briefly, and they were very receptive to these subjects because they touch on shamanics and consciousness, which they're interested in. From that, I just tried to show that the person is faced with having the experience and deteriorating into a state of depression or insanity from the fact that people won't accept these experiences. And it's a travesty that these people can't be accepted on their own terms. It's like schizophrenia. They have to be labeled and locked up. And I think if we accept that what happens if they survive the experience? That inevitably their perception of reality has been widened and opened up to a number of possible paradigms that they might not have normally entertained. And the couch potato who needs to be, shown proof, maybe he's the one that has to have an abduction experience and have things done to him. I wouldn't say that that's the exact definition of what's going on, but maybe that is. Maybe we have to be shaken by the collar and shown that, look, there's more to reality than meets the eye.
Right. So in a way, like, the moral of the story might be, if you open your mind a little, you may not have to get abducted by a UFO. You may be able to, or if you're just open to it, you don't have to wait till it till it comes and shakes you. You can learn from other people's experiences and be open to what they've gone through.
Which hopefully, that if once we start to talk with each other about these experiences, there'll be more of an understanding, or at least we can just start talking about it. And that's what I think. Bottom line, that's what the phenomena does. It causes us to be more social, because there's nothing more touching or intimate than to tell someone your most sacred experiences, whether it be sitting on a mountaintop and suddenly going, wow, this is a beautiful experience, or whether it's contacting some extraterrestrial intelligence via a dream or some such. What we seem to be charting are, like the title of my magazine, Elf-Infested Spaces, and it's also titled ELF Infested Spaces. And the title comes from millennial messenger Terence McKenna, who some people might know from his psychedelics enthusiasm, and but he's talked about UFOs in the context of all these things and the coming paradigm shift and so forth. And where the title came from is he says that you can induce contact with these beings via certain psychedelics like mushrooms or DMT and so forth, and he calls them elf-infested spaces. And I altered it by ELF because among the UFO community there's this whole sinister undercurrent of mind control that you hear about, where people, whether it be the aliens or the government, somebody is perpetrating these psychotronic technologies upon our brains and causing us to have these experiences, or causing us to repress them, or any number of things. There's a whole area of literature that deals with this. And anyway, a lot of the times they discuss it as being ELF, extremely low frequency radiation, because you can't really shield against that, and we could be irradiated by them right at this minute and wouldn't even know it, and it might be affecting us in subtle ways that we wouldn't even be able to consciously recognize. So that's where the title of that came from. And Journal of Possible Paradigms is simply, I originally was going to call it the newsletter of the new paradigm, but then I heard a quote from Robert Anton Wilson, who said, he's sick of hearing about this new paradigm because we don't need a new one. We need to abandon the paradigm altogether. We need to, or have a paradigm that's all-inclusive, that's a multiplicity of paradigms. And that's what I stress, is a pluralist interpretation of these phenomena, looking at the possible paradigms, because they all equally fit the data, some more than others, and it really comes down to what you feel intuitively is the truth. And I have my own version, you'll have your own version, but what's important is that we can talk about them and see what common ground we have.
Excellent. Well, you're a perfect P.E.A.C.E guest. The P.E.A.C.E, creative evolution, the whole concept is creating a situation where everybody's reality can interconnect, and evolution happens when we break down the barriers of either, I'm right or you're right, and kind of move on.
Yeah.
So.
One last thing, as to evolution, I always get sick of people talking about Darwin. I mean, Darwin
Right.
was great, and Darwin himself admitted that his theory was incomplete and that it was only part of the truth. And everybody talks about the competition involved in Darwinian evolution, and what we always forget is cooperation is another form of evolution that is mimicked in the animal kingdom, and you can find it. It's not something that we Westerners and in our male-dominated culture have focused on, because it's not, it doesn't fit into our worldview.
Right. Well, in particular, the idea of the evolution of consciousness as opposed to the evolution of the physical body. We've talked about this many times on this show, and when people called in and talked about evolution and they were talking about Darwin, we're saying, well, we haven't stopped evolving yet.
Right.
Hopefully,
Right.
we'll go a little further. Well, thank you very much for
Thank
coming
you.
on. And where again, people can contact to find out about MUFON meetings, Alpha-Infested Spaces. You can get it at a local bookstores? Or?
Actually, ELF is distributed privately at the moment. It will be in bookstores within 6 months. Crash Collusion, which is a fine journal to the fringe, is located at all your finer fringe bookstores like Book People and Tower Records, I think, as well. If you're interested in my publication or the UFO Experiencer Support Group, you can be reached at P.O. Box 33509, Austin, Texas 78764, I believe.
Okay, or write our show and we will give you that information here. Thanks for watching, and peace.